Hi everyone and welcome to another painting tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we're going to be painting the cities of Sigmar Amethyst Knellmage. He's been out for a few weeks. Cool looking model, got some Elden Ring Grimdark vibes going on. So I wanted to give him an ethereal look to just sort of go against the box art in a way, but try and keep with it for the main part. No sub-assemblies with this, I've just built the model. Put them onto a base and then just put a bunch of skulls all around the bottom. There's a little flame that we add a little bit later on, and that's a bit from Epic Basing. You can buy the STLs or you can buy the 3D bits and they'll post them out to you. I'm using two brushes during this. I'm using they're both Kalinsky Sables, and they're the Raphael series 8404, either a size 0 or a size 1. So first off, I've primed the model in AK Tenebrous Grey, very dark colour, almost black. It gives it a nice sort of dusty feel, and it's just a different shadow colour than your standard blacks, and it works really well when you put metallics over the top of it. So what we're doing here is just going to be doing the silvers first, and for that I'm using AK Gunmetal, but any dark silver will do here. I find gunmetal's nice and dark, it's got a slight hint of blue to it. It goes on really well, but yeah, lead bouchers, ironbreaker, any dark silver is a good colour here. Just try and make sure when you're applying this paint that in those areas on the helmet you're almost dry brushing it on there so that you leave those dark colours in the deepest recesses, like the holes of his helmet. There is a variant of this where you can have the little lid up and see his face, but I just liked it all covered up. Gave a sort of dark, ominous look to this guy. But if you were painting the skin, you would just be careful not to get any of your metallics over the skin. Once the silvers are done, we're just going to be moving over to the golds. It's not that many. For this, I'm using AK Rusty Gold. This is a sort of quite a dark gold colour. And all I'm doing here, pretty much same with silver, just applying this over all of the areas you want to be gold. Just if you want to, you can leave that Tenebrous Grey in the deepest recesses. So once we've base coated our metallics, we're just going to apply a couple of washes, and we're just using some old favourites here, some Reikland Fleshshade and Nuln Oil. The Reikland Fleshshade is for the gold, and the Nuln Oil is for all of the silvers. So don't apply too much. I just use my size 0 brush here. Take your time. Make sure it pulls in those recesses but doesn't leave any too thick a coat of paint. If it is too thick, then just empty your brush, wash it out with water, dry it, and then just apply the brush over that area and it'll absorb the paint if there's too much on the model. Then you just give it a good 10-15 minutes to dry. Shouldn't take too long. We didn't apply too much. We're now going to apply some base coats onto the cloak, and for this I wanted a sort of dark purplish magenta look. So first colour we're using is AK Violet Red. Apply a little bit of water to the paint on the wet palette, and I'm just going to be painting all of the material for those, like the cloak, in this violet red colour. Just takes a couple of coats because we are going over a dark colour. I applied 2 thin coats, I think, to cover this. I'm not a big fan of cream coloured cloaks, so where on the box art this is cream, I've just done the whole thing in the magenta colour, which is AK Violet Red. What we are going to be doing, and this is why I have a wet palette, is we're going to be doing some mixes in a minute where we're going to be going from the violet red upper level to magenta, and then upper level to a desaturated flesh colour called Vamperic Flesh, both from AK, just to do a little bit of edge highlighting and some wear and tear. You can do this on a dry palette like a plate, or the ones you get from Warhammer themselves, but the wet palettes now, you can buy them for about 20 or 30 pounds. You can buy up to like 50 of the hydrated sheets, so I think they're a great tool to have. They help keep the wet usable for long periods of time, and they really help when you want to do mixes and blending and wet blending. Yeah, they're a great thing to have, and they'll last for ages. I've had, in the last 10 years, I've had 2 wet palettes, so they do last a very long time. So with a little bit of TV magic, I've painted all of the cloaks with the violet red, and we're now going to be using Caribou Crimson from Warhammer. It's a shade paint, very, very strong, and I just wanted to darken this down and also add some depth into those recesses. So I'm just applying this Caribou Crimson all over the cloak areas. Just be careful around any of the metallics that you've already painted. I would say give this 10-15 minutes to dry. If you do see any unnecessary pulling of the paint, where it's pooling in certain areas, just quickly apply a wet brush to that area just to dissipate it. That's why you shouldn't generally overload the brush too much on this. As I said, it's a very strong colour, so just take care to spread that paint around. So once it's dry, you can see it's darkened it down quite a bit. I've now added some water, a couple of drops of paint from the paintbrush, just a couple of drops, into the violet red. So it creates a sort of semi-glaze now. It's probably about 50-50 paint, maybe even 60-40 in favour of water. And I'm just using it now to just layer over that original base coat that we've got, just to bring back the violet red colour, leaving the Caribou Crimson that we added as the deepest recess colour. We're just bringing back the brightness. The key here is I don't want to go too bright, because I want my bright points to be the flame from the candle and the skulls. That's where I want the brightest. So when you're painting a miniature, if you've got too many bright spots, then nothing's bright. And again, if you've got too much dark, then nothing's dark. Having good contrast is key to getting some good effects on your model. So for me, yeah, I don't want anything to be brighter than our glowing effects that we're going to be having, which is why we're when we're highlighting this cloak, we're using sort of desaturated colours, and we're only taking it up maybe halfway in brightness, just so that we maintain the overall effect from the glowing that we will want to achieve. So now we're moving on to AK Magenta, and what I'm going to be doing here is just using the wet palette now and just mixing it in almost till I get a sort of 50-50 mix. It's quite a wet mix, so just a bit thicker than a glaze, and so we've got a good mid-tone now between the violet red and the magenta. And then what I'm doing here, a little bit like we did with our initial layering, but I'm just going over a smaller area and just applying this over the raised areas, making sure I do an edge highlight. Any areas that you want to be brighter now, just pick out with this 50-50 mix. Once you're happy with that, I'm now mixing in that desaturated flesh tone, that Vamperic Flesh. When you add in these desaturated colours, what you're doing with the highlight is, I find it helps show some wear and tear on the model, that it's not just a brighter colour on top of a darker colour. This is a brighter colour, but we're using a sort of desaturated one that you would find on some clothing where the red has faded down into just a bleached out beige colour, and that's what I'm going for here, so that we have quite a step up in our highlights, a huge jump that we've got, but where we're using it very sparingly, almost as an edge highlight, and just to add some scratches and scrapes on the model. Now, it's a good way of showing that there's edges on our item, but there's also some wear and tear. So once that's done, all of our washes that we did are all dry now. So I'm just going to move on to highlight the gold, and for that I'm using AK Olg Gold, which is sort of a Retributor armor. Sort of if you were looking at the Warhammer range, and all I'm doing here is just picking out the finer edges of the sort of medallion around his neck, a little bit on the top of the scythe and on the little like mini axes on his helmet. Again, not too bright a highlight. We want to maintain the rule we've got of the brightest point is our glowing effects. So now I'm just moving in to highlight the silvers, and for that I'm using AK stainless steel, AK natural steel. But yeah, your shiniest silver colour now. Just pick out the edges, not too much. I just do, there's little rims around the helmet there. I just pick out those, any rivet holes, not too much. Like, as I said, we want to maintain the grimdark look of this, but we do want to show that there is some highlights coming through. Okay, now we're moving on to the other areas like leather and bone, and for these areas I'm going to base coat them all in AK Grim Brown, which is a bit like Rhinox hide. For the leather we're then going to use leather brown, actually, and for the skulls as well. So we do a base coat of Grim Brown, so we cover all of the skulls, all of the leather in this Grim Brown colour. You can leave a little bit of the Tenebrous Grey in the deepest recesses. And then we go over with our first layer of leather brown over all of it, over the skulls and all of the leather as well. And we overlay by about 90%, so we just leave the grim brown in the deepest recesses. So now we're moving on to our first difference now between the skulls and the leather. So we're going to focus on the leather parts, and for that we're going to be using AK Saddle Brown. And what I do here is I just apply the Saddle Brown. I just add little edge highlights, not too much here. We just pick out where the straps are holding the skull onto his chest, the bottom of the sort of cloak I've painted leather, and to just scratch out the markings of his shoes, just to show they've got some detail on them. And as a final highlight for the leather, I use some of that saddle brown and just mix a bit of the Vamperic Flesh into it, so we get a sort of mid-tone of saddle brown and that desaturated flesh colour. And I just do some simple edge highlights and some scratches and scrapes on the leather work. Going back to the skulls, I now use AK Mud Brown, and I just layer over the top of the leather brown with this mud brown, covering, with skulls you focus on the flatness of the sort of forehead, the eyes, nose and the teeth, leaving that darker colour in the deepest recesses, always covering with your layers less than you originally did. So at first it's 100% coverage, then about 80%, 60, 50, 40, just keep going less and less and less, so that your highlight is a very small spot on the overarching model. Once that mud brown is done, I then move over to AK Deck Tan. I make about a 50-50 mix between mud brown and deck tan because there's quite a jump in colour there. And again, like I said, it's just a smaller highlight, scrapes and scratches, picking out the bottom of the eye sockets, the nose and the teeth, and then I use pure deck tan as a final highlight. If you're looking at Warhammer colours, you're looking at Steel Legion Drab, Zandri Dust, Ushabti Bone, Screaming Skull. Those are really good colours, quite equal matches to these. I just find that mud brown, the deck tan colours and the leather browns, they almost give a dusty look once they go dry, a very matte finish to them, and that works well with skulls. And that's a bulk of the model done. We're now going to be moving over to the glowing effects. So the first job is to use a sort of largish brush, and what I'm going to be doing here is painting all of the flame in AK Intense Pure White. It's one of my favourite whites. I find it's got really good coverage. It goes on really well, you only need 1 or 2 coats, and that's going straight over a really, really dark colour. So I paint all of the smoke coming up from the candle, and I also paint the little flame bit that I've got on the base, and then pick out some of the eyes and areas that I want to look like there's a glowing effect coming from there. We're now going to move over to the airbrush, and I'm just going to be using this Vallejo ink white straight into the airbrush, 1 drop of water for many drops of this ink. And what I'm doing here is I'm imagining the light from the candle is reflecting downwards, so I'm just angling the model in the airbrush so that the halo that you get from the airbrush is pointing downwards, so that nozzle is almost in the center point of where you want that glowing effect to be, so you get a transition from the pure white down into that airbrushed white. And it's the same as you work around. So now I'm moving it over to where I want the glowing effect to be on his shoulder and the helmet. Short, sharp sprays, the center of the nozzle at the center of where you want that glowing effect to be reflected on, and a couple of sprays. Don't hold it down too long because the ink will pour out and pool and spiderweb and just ruin everything. So where we've got these light points in the skulls, a couple of sprays to halo it around. That's what the airbrush is really good at, is where you've got that central point of white. A spray from the airbrush gives a nice halo effect, a bit like a spray can. So on the camera, obviously it's quite bleached out, where it's so pure white, the camera's having a tough time with it, but I do show in a minute with the lights off how it looks. But for this white, yeah, the goal here is to get a nice halo transition from your pure white back out to those base colours. And just remember to keep your glowing effects minimal. There's quite a lot on this one, but actually the more you have, the less effective they are. and always have dark areas next to your light areas. That really helps sell it. So once that white is all dry, again through the airbrush we're going to use the Warhammer Contrast Frostheart, which is a lovely colour. It's surprising how you can make this look green, and because it's so blue. But just very carefully apply this over all of your white and even on some of that surrounding area as well, so that that blue colour goes over some of your base coats as well, just to show the light is dissipating away. Treat this like the ink. Be very careful when it comes out of the airbrush. This hasn't been watered down, but it is very, very thin. So short, sharp bursts. As soon as you see it looking wet on the model, move away, because if you apply any more, it will pull and it will run and it will spider web and it will look terrible. Once that's dry, it doesn't take very long, but maybe 5 or so minutes. I've got a little mix here, and this is 1 part white ink, 1 part water to 1 part contrast medium. So what you create really is a white ink contrast. And all I'm doing here is just applying some of this into where I want it to be really, really bright, and where I want the next fluorescent colour to really shine from. So this is sort of reintroducing the white into those deepest areas of where I want the glowing to be coming from. So in some of the eye sockets around the skull, the base of the candle, a little bit on the metal around his shoulder. Just remember that metal reflects light a bit better than a material would, so the glowing shine should be quite greater from the metal that's on his helmet around his shoulder than it would do from the cloth. So the good thing about this sort of white ink contrast that we make is that it's sort of like a contrast paint. It pulls in the recesses and leaves a greater intensity of white, so you're almost getting an airbrushed effect, but without the need of using the airbrush again. It's a really good little I've got a big pot of it there. I made a big pot because I just didn't want to keep mixing it all the time, because you do waste quite a bit if you've made too much. Whereas that big pot with a ball bearing in the bottom of the pot, just so that when you shake it, it mixes up nicely, because it does have a tendency to separate if left alone. Okay, once that has dried, I'd allow 10-15 minutes. We're just now going to go back to the airbrush, but in the airbrush what I've got is some white ink again, and I'm just doing what we did originally, where I'm just using the haloing effect from the airbrush just to dissipate some of that pure whiteness so that we get a little halo effect around, just to help blend it through. An optional step, but it just helps, because what I want to do is I want to turn this ethereal blue into an ethereal green, and I wanted that to affect a wider area than just the white had in it. So just doing this haloing with the airbrush here just helps the next layer that we're going to apply. So to get it to go green, we use green, and I'm using AK Fluorescent Green. Into the airbrush with a little drop of water, give it a good mix, and then again, like we were applying the contrast, the ink and the contrast originally, short sharp bursts, making sure you cover all of the white and most of the blue. If you want it to stay a little bit bluer, you can just focus on the white areas, but you'll see it's turning a nice ethereally green blue as we add this layering via the airbrush. As you can see, it's almost maxed out the camera there, but when I turn the lights off, you can see the effect now. It's looking a bit more with no lights on. You can see how the green and the blue work together, and you've got a good contrast there. It even looks like it is reflecting off of that metallic helmet that we've got. So some really good effects we've got going on. Just moving back to the white now, just want to reintroduce some brightness. So this is where you want it to be really bright. So where it's bright, it looks like heat, and where it's dark, it looks cold. So I'm just reintroducing some of this white. We're going to go over it with another fluorescent colour in a minute, into those deepest parts of where you want that glowing effect to be coming from, and obviously from the heart of the candle as well. So to get some real intensity, I've just flicked the lights off just so you can see, and we're using some AK Fluorescent Yellow, which is a great way of making green look brighter. And I'm just applying this now into those white areas we've done over the top. So that's the heat from the candle itself is all now going to be fluorescent yellow. You see I've applied an edge highlight there around the bottom of his helmet. That's going to be in the fluorescent yellow as well to show that there's a real shine point there. And even if you want to, you don't have to have this going over the pure white. You can have it just going over the fluorescent green as well, because that helps blend in from the yellow to the green and to the blue. So you can always, where the edge highlight is there, I apply a little bit of it further up just to intensify the reflection, but the real glowing point is that white highlight that we've done. And you apply these fluorescents when you with a brush, a little bit like you apply contrast. You have to apply them quite thick, but make sure you spread that paint out just so it doesn't pool or look a bit ghastly. And the final step is I do a dry brush of a dark blue colour and then AK Tenebrous Grey, just to introduce the darkening of the smoke and to bring the contrast of light to dark. You don't have to do this part, you can keep it that bright, but I've just reduced it down a bit just to help pop the glow from the centre of the candle. To finish off, I just use a mixture of a few colours here for the wax on the candle. I just use a bit of deck tan mixed with Tenebrous Grey just to introduce a sort of paleness of the wax dripping off. I use that as a highlight colour as well for the shaft of his scythe. And a little bit later on, you'll notice that I go back and I just have to infill the little pattern that's on the back of his cloak. So I just pick that out with the AK Olg Gold or Rusty Gold, just to pick that out. And then once I'm happy with the model, just the final step that I do, I just dry brush with the mud brown and the deck tan colours, those earthy bony type colours. I just dry brush the tops of the skulls, the grass tuft that I've got on the base with those colours, just to help make them look not as dark as they were, put a bit of life into them. And then paint the rim in the Army Painter's matte black as the final step. And there he is, in relatively quick times, about an hour and a half it's taken. You can see I forgot that I needed to apply some of that fluorescent colour into the sort of keyhole at the front of his mask, and I put a little bit of yellow in the bottom of it as well, just to show that the light was really reflecting there. So with the lights off, you can see our nice glowing effect where we've dulled it down a little bit, it really reflecting off the bottom part of his helmet, so it's got a really good OSL effect there. and then you've got the glowing effect on the bottom from the little flame on the skulls and the base. So yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. You can use these tricks, tips that I've given you to paint any sort of army, like even Nighthaunt, where we've used that the airbrush, the green and the blues. You can use that for your Nighthaunt as well, to give them a really good ethereal look. So if you do that, pop some images on the YouTube channel, on my Facebook page, and I'll have a look and see what they look like. So yeah, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Like, comment, and subscribe, and all that other YouTubey stuff. And happy painting, my fellow painters.